The president who came for one person. He didn't come for the tournament. He didn't come for the trophy. On May 18, 2026, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, walked through the gates of Roland Garros before a single match had been played, before the main draw had even been announced, and every eye in the stadium turned toward the same spot on the court, not toward a champion, not toward a headliner, toward a 20-year-old Filipina who had no idea she was being watched. No fanfare, no press release. The security team moved quietly. Tournament staff had been briefed to stay silent. The media, the same press corps that covers every Grand Slam with obsessive precision, had no idea what was coming. But heads of state don't show up for nothing. Presidents don't quietly slip into empty stadiums just to watch a practice session. Something was already in motion, something that the tennis world had not seen before and may never see again. The red clay of Court Philippe Chatrier was freshly pressed that morning. The lines were sharp, the nets were taut, the grounds hummed with that electric pre-tournament energy. Qualifiers warming up, coaches running drills, the quiet anticipation of a Grand Slam about to ignite. And in the middle of all of it, a young woman moved through her footwork patterns with the kind of focus that makes everything else disappear. Sharp ground strokes, precise placement, eyes locked on the ball. Alex Eala was already in match mode, mentally rehearsing, physically preparing, building herself up for the stage that was waiting just days away. She had arrived in Paris ranked 38th in the world, climbing from 42nd on the back of a breakthrough week in Rome that had turned heads across the entire tour. She had beaten world number 45 Magdalena Fresh. She had taken down 31st seed Wang Xinyu. She had pushed world number 2 Elena Rybakina to 3 full sets on one of the most hostile surfaces for qualifiers in the sport. The numbers were extraordinary, but the numbers were not why Macron was there. There was something else, something that had traveled from the Foro Italico in Rome all the way to Paris faster than any newswire. A feeling, a movement, a shift in what tennis could mean to people who had never felt represented in it before. If you want to follow every chapter of this story as it unfolds at Roland Garros and beyond, subscribe to Pro Tennis 360, because this is exactly the kind of moment we cover, not just the score, but the story behind it. What happened in Rome changed everything. To understand why the president of France was sitting in an empty stadium watching a practice session, you have to go back to Rome. You have to go back to the Foro Italico, to the week that preceded Roland Garros, to the moment when the tennis world finally began to grasp what the Alex Eala phenomenon actually was. It started with results. Eala came through qualifying and entered the main draw as a relative unknown to casual fans, ranked outside the top 40, playing against seeded opponents who had every statistical advantage. And she won. She didn't just win, she competed. She competed with the kind of calm, controlled aggression that made analysts stop mid-sentence and reassess what they thought they knew about her ceiling. But the results were only half the story. The other half was in the stands. The Filipino community showed up to the Foro Italico in a way that Italian tennis had never seen. Flags, the blue, red, white, and gold of the Philippine banner, filled entire sections. Chants of Laban Alex, meaning fight Alex, echoed off the stadium walls. People were crying.
Not the kind of quiet tear that comes with a dramatic point. Full, open, overwhelmed crying. The kind that only happens when something touches a place that has been waiting a long time to be touched. It wasn't just a tennis match. It was a homecoming for a diaspora spread across continents, a community that had sent its people to every corner of the world. Nurses to London, engineers to Dubai, caregivers to Lyon, domestic workers to Hong Kong, and had for decades watched those people sacrifice visibility, comfort, and presence for the sake of family left behind. And here on a clay court in Rome, one of their own was not just competing, she was winning, and the whole world was watching. That moment had a name before anyone officially gave it one: the Eala Effect. The way a single athlete could transform a sports venue into something that felt more like a national celebration than a tennis tournament. The way a community that had been largely invisible in global sports suddenly found its flags in frame on every broadcast. That effect traveled to Paris, and the president of France took notice. She's different, isn't she? The moment Macron spoke. For a full hour, Emmanuel Macron sat in the front row of an empty Court Philippe Chatrier and didn't touch his phone. He didn't consult his staff. He didn't check a briefing document or scroll through updates from his office. He just watched, eyes fixed on the court below, on the footwork, on the ground strokes, on the young woman who had no idea she had an audience, let alone one of the most powerful heads of state in Europe. At one point, he turned to the official beside him and said 5 words quietly. "She's different, isn't she?" The official nodded. "Yes, Mr. President, she is." It wasn't a question about ranking. It wasn't a question about serve speed or clay court statistics. Macron wasn't asking whether Alex Eala could win the French Open. He was asking about something that doesn't show up in a draw sheet. The quality that separates athletes who win tournaments from athletes who change the meaning of a sport for entire populations. "I've seen the videos from Rome," he said. "The flags, the chants, the tears. I wanted to see it for myself." "You're seeing it now, sir. Even without the crowd, you can feel it." That exchange tells you everything about what made this moment different from any other head of state appearance at a major sporting event. Macron hadn't come as a tennis fan. He hadn't come to be seen at a glamorous pre-tournament event. He had come specifically because of the Filipino community, because of what Rome had shown him about what Alex Eala represented to hundreds of thousands of people living in France. People who were part of the fabric of French society and had found, in one athlete, something that made them feel seen in a way they never quite had before. "She carries something that goes beyond tennis," the official told him. Macron watched until Eala finally packed up her bag, her focus already shifting to the next session, the next drill, the next step toward the draw that would open in 6 days. And then he stood up and said 3 words that set the rest of the day in motion. "I'd like to meet her. I don't care about her ranking." The official blinked. There was a pause, the kind that happens when something is said that cuts through every layer of protocol and procedure and lands somewhere unexpected. "Mr. President," the official said carefully, "she's a qualifier. She hasn't been seeded." Macron's response was immediate. "I don't care about her ranking." What followed was a sentence that would be repeated in press rooms and living rooms from Paris to Manila before the day was over.
The Filipino community in France is one of the largest in Europe. They work, they sacrifice, they build lives here. And in Alex Eala, they found a hero. I want to honor that. In that statement, Macron reframed the entire conversation. He wasn't honoring a champion. He wasn't recognizing a #1 ranking or a Grand Slam title. He was acknowledging impact. The kind that doesn't show up on the tour statistics page. The kind that moves through communities and neighborhoods and group chats and family dinners and late-night phone calls between a mother in Manila and a daughter working a night shift in Bordeaux. Cameras were cleared from the area. Journalists near the court were quietly escorted to other sections. The security detail formed a perimeter around the entrance to the court corridor. And when Alex Eala finally looked up from her bag, mind already drifting to the next session, the next tactical adjustment, the next piece of preparation, the president of France was standing in front of her. "Miss Eala," he said, extending his hand, "it is an honor to meet you." She had met remarkable people before: Manny Pacquiao, Kim Kardashian, Elon Musk, Taylor Swift. She had moved through rooms full of celebrity and influence with the quiet composure of someone who had learned early that the most important thing in any room was still the next ball she needed to hit. But a head of state, the leader of the country hosting the tournament she was preparing to play, the president of France on the grounds of Roland Garros 6 days before her first match. Her breath caught. "Mr. President," she managed, "the honor is mine." What Macron said to her and why it mattered. Macron didn't talk about rankings. He didn't talk about results or draw brackets or clay court win percentages. He talked about people. Specifically, he talked about the Filipino people living in France. The nurses, the caregivers, the engineers, the domestic workers, the teachers, the technicians who had left the Philippines and built lives in a country that was not their birthplace, working quietly and invisibly in the infrastructure of French society, sending remittances home every month, raising children between two languages, two cultures, two definitions of home. They work hard, he told her. They sacrifice. They contribute to this country in ways that are rarely celebrated. And in you, they have found something that makes them feel seen. He told her about a Filipino caregiver he'd heard about, working in a hospital in Marseille, who had watched the Rome videos on her phone during a break and had to step away from her colleagues because she couldn't stop the tears. He told her about the Filipino community organizations in Paris that had been flooded with messages after Rome. People who hadn't followed tennis before, who didn't know a clay court from a grass one, but who knew exactly what it meant to see someone who looked like them standing in the middle of a grand slam and belonging there. What you've created isn't just a fan base, Macron said quietly. It's a movement, and France sees it. Eala's eyes glistened. She didn't have words in that moment. Nobody who has spent their life grinding through qualifying rounds in developmental circuits, who has lost more times than they can count and kept coming back, who has carried the weight of an entire community's hope in the quiet of a pre-dawn practice session, nobody in that position is prepared to hear a president describe what they mean to people. She stood there on the grounds of Roland Garros and let it land. The weight of it, the meaning of it, the fact that the movement had grown large enough to reach this moment, this man, this place.
And she had absolutely no idea that the biggest moment of that entire day was still an hour away. The press conference that stopped the room. The press room at Roland Garros filled up for what journalists expected to be a routine pre-tournament briefing. Logistics, security updates, match scheduling. The kind of administrative formalities that veterans of the tour have sat through hundreds of times, often with phones in hand, half present, waiting for something newsworthy. Instead, Emmanuel Macron walked to the podium. The energy in the room shifted instantly. A pre-tournament press conference with the President of France was not on anyone's calendar. Cameras that have been resting on laps snapped up, notebooks opened. The casual murmur of a dozen side conversations cut off mid-sentence. Macron surveyed the room for a moment before speaking. "I have watched many athletes compete on French soil," he began. "Footballers lift the World Cup, cyclists conquer the Alps, champions in every sport imaginable." He paused. "But I have rarely seen an athlete connect with people the way Alex Eala has connected with the Filipino community." The room went still. In Rome, she turned a tennis tournament into a homecoming. The flags, the chants, the tears. They weren't just about tennis. They were about belonging, about being seen. France is a country shaped by immigrants, by people who left everything behind to build something better. The Filipino community here is part of that story. He paused. The silence in the room felt deliberate, like the space before a sentence that changes everything. "Therefore, I am announcing that the French government will establish a special cultural exchange program between France and the Philippines, funded by a grant of 750,000 euros in Alex Eala's name." Gasps! Actual gasps! From seasoned tennis journalists who had covered every Grand Slam for 2 decades. From WTA officials who thought they had seen everything the sport could produce in terms of off-court moments. From broadcast producers who had been mentally composing their routine tournament preview packages and suddenly realized they were sitting inside a historic moment. "She has not yet played a single match at Roland Garros," Macron continued, his voice steady, his eyes moving across the room. She may win, she may lose, but she has already won something far more important, the hearts of our people, and for that, we are grateful. The WTA officials who sat frozen. In the back of the press room, the WTA officials sat in a silence that had a different quality from the rest. For the journalists, the gasps came from surprise and the instinct toward a story. For the WTA officials, the silence was something more complicated. The kind that comes from realizing in real time that the institution you represent has been operating by a set of metrics that just got exposed as incomplete. Not even close, one official said quietly to another as Macron finished speaking. In 20-plus years of professional women's tennis, no head of state has ever announced a grant of this size in the name of a player who hasn't won a single match at the tournament. The other official didn't respond immediately. They were still processing. This isn't about results, the first continued. He's honoring her impact. That's a completely different thing. And then, in a sentence that would stay with the people who heard it long after the press conference ended, we've been measuring the wrong things. That realization, slow, uncomfortable, and impossible to dismiss, would linger in conversations across the tour for weeks. The WTA measures wins and losses, rankings and prize money, titles and head-to-head records. It has built an entire ecosystem of metrics designed to track excellence on the court. And all of those metrics had completely missed what Alex Eala had been building in the stands, in the communities, in the group chats, in the hearts of a diaspora that had never before had an athlete to call their own at this level of the sport. The Eala Effect had been visible for months to anyone paying attention. It showed up in the crowd sizes at her matches, in the flag counts in the stands, in the way local Filipino community organizations in every city on tour reported a surge of new members and new interest every time Eala played, in the emotional intensity of the response to her Rome performances that had gone viral across multiple platforms simultaneously. The WTA had the data. They just hadn't been asking the right questions of it. And now a head of state had asked those questions for them in the most public forum imaginable. And the answer had come back in the form of a 750,000 euros commitment and a room full of gasping journalists. From the Eiffel Tower to the rice terraces, how the news traveled. The announcement moved faster than any serve Alex Eala had ever hit. From Paris to Manila, from the Eiffel Tower to the rice terraces of Ifugao, the news traveled at a speed that no press release, no official statement, no carefully crafted media strategy could have engineered. It traveled the way only genuinely meaningful things travel, person to person, phone to phone, tier to tier. Maria had lived in Lyon for 12 years. She had come from Quezon City at the age of 29 to work as a caregiver, had learned French in 6 months out of necessity, had sent money home every single month without fail, for her children's school fees, for her mother's medication, for a house that was being built one remittance at a time. She had missed birthdays. She had missed funerals. She had missed Christmases that she could only attend through a phone screen, waving at children who were growing up with a mother they knew better as a voice than as a presence. She heard about the grant during a break at work. She stepped into a hallway, away from the nurse's station, away from her colleagues, and let herself cry. "I've worked hard," she said later, in an interview that would be shared hundreds of thousands of times across Filipino diaspora communities. "I've sent money home. I've missed birthdays and funerals and Christmases. For 12 years, I felt invisible. And then today, the President of France gives 750,000 euros in Alex Eala's name. Not because she won, because she represents us, because he sees us, because we matter." The hashtag Eala grant trended globally within hours. Filipino news anchors, professionals trained to deliver information with measured composure, struggled to get through their segments without their voices breaking. Community Facebook groups that normally hummed with local announcements and remittance tips and shared recipes flooded with the same message, sent in 100 different ways. Did you see what happened? Did you see? In Paris, a small but passionate Filipino community gathered outside Roland Garros. Flags raised, chants rising, celebrating not a victory on the court, not a trophy or a ranking milestone, but a promise. The promise that someone had looked at what they had built around this young woman and decided it deserved to be honored. "This grant is not for me," Eala's words to the fans. The cameras had stopped rolling. The press conference had ended. The officials had gone back inside to process what had just happened and begin drafting their responses. But Alex Eala wasn't done.
She walked out of the stadium, past the security guards, past the tournament officials, past her coaches, past her mother, and straight toward the fans who were still standing outside the gates. Flags still waving, voices still carrying. A crowd that had gathered not because a match was about to start, but because they needed to be somewhere that felt like home. She stopped in front of them. The noise settled. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady. Her eyes weren't. "Thank you for never giving up on me, for traveling across continents, for waving your flags when I was winning and when I was losing. You are why I keep fighting." The crowd erupted. She raised a hand and they quieted just enough for her to continue. "President Macron's grant is not for me. It's for every Filipino child who dares to dream bigger. It's for every OFW who sacrifices so their family can have a future. It's for everyone who has ever felt invisible, to remind them that they are seen." Her voice caught. She took a breath. "I haven't won a single match here yet. I might lose in the first round. I might lose in the second. I honestly don't know what's going to happen. But I know this. Whatever happens on that court, I will fight. I will not quit. And I will carry every single one of you with me. Laban, Alex. Laban, Alex. Laban, Alex." The flags surged upward. The chant rose again. The same chant that had bounced off the walls of the Foro Italico in Rome, now echoing outside the most famous clay court in the world. And in that moment, before one ball had been struck at Roland Garros, before the draw had even been formally announced, Alex Eala had already won something the scoreboard would never be able to measure. She stood there and received it, not as a champion receiving a trophy, but as a person receiving the full weight of what she meant to people she had never met, who had nonetheless made her career their own. The question worth sitting with. And what comes next? The 750,000 euros grant carries her name, but it belongs to a movement. It belongs to every nurse working a night shift in Lyon who missed putting their child to bed. Every engineer in Marseille who hasn't been home in 3 years. Every student in Paris navigating 2 identities and 2 definitions of what it means to belong. Every dreamer who watched those Rome videos and cried without fully knowing why. Because sometimes a feeling is real before the words for it exist. Alex Eala arrives at Roland Garros 2026, ranked 38th in the world, with a record of 18 wins and 2 losses on the year, 4-4 on clay, having beaten 2 seeded players in Rome and pushed the world number 2 to the limit. By every technical metric she has ever been measured by, she has never been better. But she is stepping onto court Philippe Chatrier, carrying something that no ranking can quantify. The accumulated hope and pride of a diaspora that stretches from Paris to Riyadh to Singapore to Sydney. A community that has, in the span of a few remarkable months, transformed from passive observers of a sport they barely followed into one of the most emotionally invested fan bases the women's tour has ever seen. She will play her first-round singles match in the coming days. She will compete in doubles alongside Victoria Mboko. Every point will be watched. Every winner will be celebrated. Every loss will be carried communally. The way communities carry things, not alone, but together, with the understanding that the story doesn't end with one result.
Alex Eala arrives at Roland Garros 2026, ranked 38th in the world, with a record of 18 wins and 2 losses on the year, 4-4 on clay, having beaten 2 seeded players in Rome and pushed the world number 2 to the limit. By every technical metric she has ever been measured by, she has never been better. But she is stepping onto court Philippe Chatrier, carrying something that no ranking can quantify: the accumulated hope and pride of a diaspora that stretches from Paris to Riyadh to Singapore to Sydney. A community that has, in the span of a few remarkable months, transformed from passive observers of a sport they barely followed into one of the most emotionally invested fan bases the women's tour has ever seen. She will play her first-round singles match in the coming days. She will compete in doubles alongside Victoria Mboko. Every point will be watched. Every winner will be celebrated. Every loss will be carried communally, the way communities carry things, not alone, but together, with the understanding that the story doesn't end with one result.
So here is the question worth sitting with when she walks out onto that red clay for her opening match. Will she be playing for herself? For the ranking points, the prize money, the competitive fire that has driven her since she was a teenager training in Barcelona? Or will she be playing for the millions who have believed in her since before the world was paying attention? Maybe both. Maybe that's always been the point. Maybe the athletes who change a sport are the ones who never have to choose between those two things. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to follow every chapter of this story, the matches, the moments, the movement, subscribe to Pro Tennis 360. We cover what the scoreboard can't.